The National Desk, America's News, now.
I think like what's going on right here should never be happening. It's a very, very sad day in America, I can tell you that.
History in the making as the first criminal trial against Donald Trump gets underway. The reason why day one ended early. And more unrest on the campus of Columbia University on day 6. Protesters doubling down in their efforts to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. Coming up, what the university says it was forced to do today and why the New York governor is now involved. Then an E. coli alert issue. What products are bringing on the concern? This is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Amira David. We start in New York City tonight, where two major stories are unfolding. Protests continue to embroil Columbia University for a 6th day and have now expanded to other Ivy League schools in the Northeast. This as the curtain opens on the historic criminal trial against a former president, Donald Trump. Opening statements heard in that hush money case today. But first, to Columbia University, where classes were forced to go virtual as pro-Palestinian and ceasefire advocates effectively shut down campus on their 6th day of ongoing protests. New York Governor Kathy Hochul visited the campus today in an effort to de-escalate tensions, with reports that protesters and counter-protesters have occasionally faced off.
Students are scared. They're afraid to walk on campus. They don't deserve that. They deserve to be in an environment that is free from discrimination as required by state human rights laws.
The NYPD said there were no specific claims of violence on campus against Jewish students throughout the day. Still, the university said they would provide escorts for any Jewish student remaining on campus who would be attending holiday services tonight, as the Jewish holiday of Passover begins at sundown. Separately, on the campus of Yale University, 45 people arrested this morning as protesters there carried out similar demonstrations. Those detained were charged with criminal trespassing and then released. Students also protested Israel's military campaign in Gaza at MIT and also at Emerson in Boston. Harvard restricted access to its campus until Friday in an apparent effort to avoid similar demonstrations there. And tonight, both sides came out swinging. That was one expert's characterization of the opening statements in the criminal trial of former President Donald Trump. Prosecutors said, quote, "This case is about a criminal conspiracy and a cover-up." Trump's legal team, meanwhile, said he is innocent and not involved in the alleged hush money payments. For more, let's go to national correspondent Christine Frizzell.
Indiana Congressman Jim Banks among a growing list of conservative lawmakers to push to defund NPR with a new bill that would outright block federal funding for the news organization, accusing Congress of spending taxpayer money on, quote, low-grade propaganda. This after a recent article from senior editor Yuri Berliner, who has since resigned, detailing examples of the news organization deciding not to dig into the Hunter Biden laptop story or to make corrections after extensive reporting on Trump-Russia collusion.
And then the Mueller report came out and no collusion. And, I think we sort of learned the story kind of disappeared.
Revelations about anti-Trump bias at NPR also leading to calls for change in the Senate.
Doesn't shock me. It just shows you how grotesquely partisan NPR has become. And I would really question, why is the federal government funding such a partisan institution? We shouldn't.
The article has thrust new CEO Catherine Maher into the spotlight. Critics say she's ultra-liberal and divisive, though she insists she doesn't take part in editorial decisions.
Because of this dividing line, this firewall between editorial and management, I don't sit in our newsroom discussions.
Still, in an election year featuring Trump at the top of the ticket once again, questions loom large about NPR's fairness in coverage in the months ahead.
Of the 87 people working in editorial positions there, 87 are Democrats. Even if you're a Democrat, you can't think.
Underway right now, police have identified a person of interest in the shooting death of a Chicago police officer who was killed while heading home from his shift. Officers responded to reports of gunshots and found the off-duty officer, Luis Huesca, shot several times in the Gage Park neighborhood yesterday morning. He was just 30 years old. Police are looking into reports that the officer's gun was stolen. No arrests have yet been made. And this, as we learn, an Idaho officer has died after being shot during a traffic stop. 27-year-old Ada County Sheriff's Deputy Tobin Bolter was shot as he approached the driver's window on Saturday night. The driver, we understand, then sped off. Police later tracked down the 65-year-old suspect who was ultimately killed in a shootout. There's been a slight increase of officer deaths around the country lately. Since a week ago on Sunday, 9 officers have died. 6 were shot or killed in action. So far this year, according to the Officer Down Memorial page, 47 officers have died, outpacing the total from last year that had 137 deaths. Right now, a third shipping channel is now open in the port of Baltimore. This will alleviate some of the congestion following the collapse of that Francis Scott Key Bridge that happened last month. This new temporary path has a bigger clearance, allowing a greater variety of boats to pass through. Crews hope to open up a 4th channel by the end of the month, which would bring commercial activities near pre-collapse levels. Meanwhile, nationwide bridge infrastructure has actually been improving as of late. According to Axios, citing the federal government's national inventory, bridges rated as poor has fallen from 15% in 2000 to about 6.8% today. The Department of Transportation says it would cost more than $276 billion to repair all 42,000 of those bridges. But if the focus on those that have been in poor condition for more than 5 years, the number drops to $4.6 billion. Workers have begun building a $12 billion high-speed passenger rail line between Las Vegas and the Los Angeles area. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg attended a ceremonial groundbreaking this morning.
I am firmly convinced that once the first customer buys that first ticket to ride true high-speed rail on American soil, there will be no going back. People will demand and expect this everywhere, and leaders will respond, and more high-speed rail lines are coming.
The company leading the effort says the goal is to lay 218 miles of new track and to have trains operating by the 2028 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles. A second person, identified as 63-year-old Cheryl Turner, has died from their injuries following the semi-truck crash into a Texas Department of Public Safety office on April 12. Texas DPS officials say that Clenard Parker stole an 18-wheeler and intentionally crashed into the office, at the time killing 1 and injuring 13 others. Parker remains held in custody without bail. A Maryland teen will be held in jail without bond. A judge saying 18-year-old Alex Ye is a public safety risk. He was arrested last week after police discovered what they call a manifesto outlining a school shooting plan. Ye claimed the writing was a fictional story. The case will be brought to a grand jury in the coming weeks. The state's attorney says Ye will be tried as an adult. He's been charged with threat of mass violence, which carries up to 10 years in prison. The Biden administration looks to extend privacy laws to patients seeking abortions, along with the healthcare workers who provide the procedures. The administration has issued a new rule that strengthens HIPAA, the move offering more robust protections to women in states where it is not legal to terminate a pregnancy, but is limited to those who cross state lines for an abortion. White House officials say there's only one way to protect everyone.
Dobbs took away rights. Until we have a national law that reinstitutes Roe versus Wade, we're going to have issues.
Under past rules, healthcare workers were allowed to provide private information to law enforcement in some cases, like criminal investigations. Ramping up HIPAA in this case is likely to see legal challenges. The Supreme Court announced today they will hear arguments over whether the government can regulate ghost guns, more specifically firearms without a serial number that are made from a kit or a 3D printer. The Biden administration is appealing a decision of a lower court that struck down its regulations on these untraceable guns. Abortion coming back to the Supreme Court this week as well. The Supreme Court plans to hear testimony on Wednesday regarding a dispute over Idaho's near total abortion ban that may conflict with a federal law that requires Medicare participating hospitals to give stabilizing treatment to mothers, including an abortion, if their health is at risk. And the justices seem divided after hearing arguments today about whether a city in Oregon should be able to ban homeless people from sleeping in public. We likely won't get a ruling on this until late June. Coming up, TikTok is vowing to fight back as Washington nears passage of a bill that could ban the app in the United States. We're going to take a look at TikTok's future. Then, the food that the government is now warning Americans not to eat because it could contain E. coli. And later, calls to remove toxic chemicals from America's drinking water finally being answered. We'll look at what's being done. Stay with us. The Senate is expected to pass a package of House-approved legislation focused on foreign aid that also includes a measure that would force TikTok to be sold from its Chinese parent company or be banned in the United States. National correspondent Atral Nashar explains how this would work and how TikTok vows to fight back.
This time next year, Americans on TikTok may be a thing of the past.
The bill is passed without objection.
On Saturday, when the House passed a bill to force Beijing-based ByteDance to sell TikTok, an eventual ban of the popular app started to look inevitable.
The idea that we would give the Communist Party this much of a propaganda tool, as well as the ability to scrape 170 million Americans' personal data, it is a national security risk.
ByteDance does not want to sell, and even if it did, China has indicated it would not allow it. Export controls allow its government to prevent the sale of TikTok's algorithm. TikTok, which is headquartered in Los Angeles and Singapore, plans to fight back. In an internal memo to staff, the company said if the bill becomes law, they would challenge it in court. It's likely they'd argue the same thing they have in public, that a ban violates the First Amendment.
We're spending $2 billion to make sure that we're keeping TikTok safe. We have a U.S.-led team.
TikTok executives trying to counter Washington's narrative.
We have not been asked for any data by the Chinese government, and we have never provided it.
But according to recent reporting, during meetings with congressional staff, Chinese embassy officials sought to claim the company as Chinese. The Senate will start voting on this as soon as Tuesday, and it is expected to pass. The president says he supports the text and is eager to sign it into law. Then the countdown on TikTok's presence in the U.S. begins. ByteDance would have 9 months to sell TikTok to a buyer that is not controlled by a foreign adversary. The president could then grant a 3-month extension if a viable sale isn't yet finalized. Some of the 170 million Americans on TikTok aren't shy about what they think.
This is going to be the reason why I hate the federal government.
Like, the government can take away a literal app on our phones, and we're supposed to believe we're free?
The timing of the expected law gives its supporters some cover. Its ultimate result wouldn't be clear until after the November election. On Capitol Hill, I'm Atral Nashar for the National Desk, America's News Now.
Atra, thank you. And $7 billion in federal grant funding now going towards solar power. President Biden made this announcement in honor of Earth Day in Triangle, Virginia's Prince William Forest Park today.
Low-income families can spend up to 30% of their paychecks on their energy bills. It's outrageous.
Administration officials say the initiative will greatly reduce emissions and save families $350 million per year. And tonight, United Nations has approved an independent review that said Israel failed to offer evidence that showed UNRWA workers took part in the October 7th massacre, as was alleged by the country. And of course, sparked a series of arrests, firings, and a sprawling investigation. Hillel Noor, that's the executive director of UN Watch, the organization behind many of the claims against UNRWA. He posted on X today that they were told by the review team in February that information depicting individual cases would not be considered in the final report. Officials are investigating the death of a U.S. Marine killed during a training exercise in North Carolina last Thursday. Sergeant Colin Arsalanabas was assigned to the Maritime Special Purpose Force and stationed on Camp Lejeune. His decorations include the Marine Corps Good Conduct Medal, Global War on Terrorism Service Medal, and National Defense Service Medal. The USDA is urging people not to eat certain kinds of ground beef because it could contain E. coli. Greater Omaha Packing Company's ground beef produced in March with a best buy date of April 22nd could be contaminated. The product is no longer being sold, but if you have it, you should throw it out immediately. E. coli can be deadly and causes GI issues up to 8 days after exposure. New tonight, the clothing company Express Inc. has filed for bankruptcy and plans to close over 100 stores. The retailer operates Express Factory Outlets, Bonobos, and UpWest. Business observers say Express has struggled to adapt to the rise of casual wear. The company says it's gotten $35 million in new financing and has a possible buyer for most locations. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has inducted its 2024 class. Cher, Mary J. Blige, Dionne Warwick, Jimmy Buffett, and a dozen others were selected. The chairman of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Foundation says the inductees have broken down musical barriers and influenced countless other artists after them. The induction ceremony will take place on October 19th in Cleveland, Ohio. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering the issues that matter most to you. We're taking the pulse of America.
Inside Muckleshoot Casino, police tape blocks off the area where a 29-year-old man was randomly stabbed.
Just came up behind him and stabbed him in the neck area.
Auburn police do not believe the two men knew one another and say it doesn't appear they had any contact prior to the stabbing.
Random attacks of violence like this do happen, but they're very rare. In most cases, they're targeted occurrences, so this is really random and very rare for us.
Casino visitors question how a weapon could make it inside the building, adding the resort is typically a safe environment.
Yeah, it definitely makes me feel a little nervous coming here.
How did they get through with security being, with weapons and stuff like that?
Ever since losing his son Alex after a gunman opened fire on Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in 2017, Max Schachter has dedicated his life to preventing tragedies like the Valentine's Day shooting from happening again. And now he's launching a new comprehensive school safety dashboard. something he's been working on with the University of Florida for the past 2.5 years. It's through his organization's website called Safe Schools for Alex.
It's a tool for parents to understand what's happening in their school. They can type in their school and see exactly what's happening in their classroom. They can see the incidents of bullying, violence, drugs, the number of weapons that are coming into every classroom.
His smile lights up the world. He is my heart. If you get to know him, you'll smile all the time. When you see him coming, you'll smile. When you hear his laughter, it's the sun coming through the clouds. He is joy.
But that joy ended a month ago for Seth Rogers, when his son Sebastian is believed to have walked off from his home in the middle of the night. That, according to Sebastian's mother and stepfather, Katie and Chris Proudfoot. Since investigators scaled back their initial ground search to focus more on the investigative side of the case, Rogers says he has not relented in looking for his boy. Rogers is now getting help from the United Cajun Navy, an organization that's aided in hundreds of search and rescues and disasters across the country.
Coming up, we will look into the new standards limiting toxic forever chemicals in the country's water supply. That's right after this. The EPA has created the first ever national standards to limit toxic forever chemicals known as PFAS in America's drinking water. For more than 2 years, Spotlight on America has investigated the presence of these highly toxic chemicals in our soil, consumer goods, and water supply. National investigative correspondent Lisa Fletcher reports on the calls for action that are finally being heard.
PFAS are known as forever chemicals because they never break down. But they build up in our blood and organs and have been tied to serious health issues like cancer, reproductive harm, and developmental delays in children. Yet they remain in the drinking water of millions of Americans. We saw it firsthand in 2022 when we tested drinking water in the nation's capital. We collected samples everywhere, from suburban homes and businesses to the halls of the U.S. Capitol and even out of the faucets at the headquarters of the agency in charge, the EPA. More than a third contained PFOA, considered one of the most dangerous chemicals. In 2 of our tests in suburban Virginia homes, the results were more than 1,200 times higher than levels the EPA was recommending at the time.
The EPA has understood the harms caused by PFAS since at least 1998, but failed to act for a long time. So this announcement is a really big deal because people have waited decades to have cleaner water.
Scott Faber is the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs at the Environmental Working Group.
You deal with a lot of very serious issues when it comes to toxins and our health and our environment. How serious is PFAS among them?
These chemicals are toxic at extremely, extremely low levels. Every time we study them, we learn they are even more toxic than we previously understood.
The new limits are up to 17 times lower than the guidelines the agency had been working off of since 2016.
PFAS is everywhere. PFAS is in the blood of polar bears. We found it at the top of Mount Everest. They're in everyone's blood. They're in every water system.
But Faber says the Biden administration has allocated $10 billion to upgrade water treatment facilities with the technology to reduce these chemicals.
We made an agreement with this country that they would take care of us people.
Activist and actor Mark Ruffalo, who's been on the ground in some of the hardest hit communities and has testified before Congress along with Faber on the issue, said the announcement is too late for those who were poisoned by PFAS polluters without their knowledge or consent, but that the new rules bring justice to families for what can only be described as one of the greatest environmental crimes in our history.
It's been decades since the EPA first understood that PFAS was toxic and building up in our bodies. This is an extraordinarily long time coming, but finally, communities will know that the water they're drinking is safer.
For Spotlight on America, I'm Lisa Fletcher.
Coming up, Passover begins today. We'll tell you about the history and the symbolism behind the Jewish holiday right after this. Many will observe the Jewish holiday Passover today, starting at sundown. Passover is celebrated each and every year over 7 or 8 days. The holiday commemorates the exodus of ancient Israelites from slavery in Egypt, as reported in the Bible. For many Jewish people, the holiday symbolizes the start of a Jewish nation and freedom. Passover ends on April 30th. Happy Passover to all. That does it for this edition of the National Desk. We do invite you to join us again this evening for more coverage of America's top stories. Just check your local listings. I'm Amira David. Have yourself a wonderful Monday night, and thank you so much for watching.